I'm going to start. I do know some people have gone to, there's been a memorial service for an artist who passed away 3, 4, 5 days ago. And I think some people are going to be coming from there, but we'll start. And welcome back to Ashwita's. And this is the final part of a 3-part series talking about the history of art in Madras, starting from 2000 years ago in this region all the way to now. What I'm going to be speaking about is the 1960s. Why the 1960s? That's when Madras encounters and engages with modern art, right? So, which is possibly a good 70, 80 years after Europe, particularly Paris, has engaged with modern art, with Picasso and so on. So, to give you a little bit of context, today we'll be doing a lot more show and tell because we have all these lovely artworks here. So I'm not going to, you don't have to look at that many slides, but you do still have to look at a few. And I want to orient you, so this will be a bit of a, we're not going to go back all the way, but we're going to start where I stopped last week, where I spoke about the college, the formation of the college, the artists who were involved, and finally I ended this talk with D.P. Roy Chaudhary coming in as principal and creating a whole new era for the college, one that was predominantly India-centric. The ideology was nationalistic. The vision for the arts was independently Indian as opposed to an independent India, but an independently Indian imagery and a direction that art was taking. It was on the back of what was happening in Bengal, in Calcutta at the time as well. So I'm going to go just a little back in time where you can see this painting. It is not by an Indian artist, it is by an artist called Horace Van Ruth. Now Horace Van Ruth was, today they classify him as an Orientalist, right? So there is this whole new classification of art for artists who have traveled the entire belt. That is, you start somewhere in Europe, you start either in France or in England or Germany or wherever, and you go on this exotic quest. If you remember last time I spoke about artists who traveled with the British East India Company, with the French East India Company, with the Dutch and Danish to come here to these exotic lands. But by the 1890s, India was no longer that exotic. It was another colony of the British Empire, and travel was very frequent. And because of the British Empire, artists could freely travel across most of Europe, across most of the Middle East, and down all the way literally to Bombay. So Horace Van Ruth did that as well. So he traveled, he left England, went to Paris, made his way to Morocco and Turkey and Istanbul there, and then he would come down to Lahore and Afghanistan, and then eventually make his way down to Bombay, where he set himself up in a little studio. And of course, Bombay, as today and then, was the financial capital and found a lot of patronage. And he started painting works like this. So what we are looking at is a very Indian scene. It's a typical Marathi house. The inner courtyard of the house, you can see the Tulsi plant on the right side. You can see the lady of the house, very Ravi Verma-ish. But rather, I would call a Horace Van Ruth, Ravi Verma, a very Horace Van Ruth-ish. Because in the timeline, these guys come into the country first with this kind of an imagery. They are creating composite images. So this was not a posed scene. He did not have people standing there. He certainly could not keep a young child standing there for hours on end while he painted. So as I said, photography really was a disruptive technology, right? So today we talk about, think about Instagram today, right? It's an extension of the camera, and news that happens in how far can, nothing seems far anymore. Let's say something in Siberia or the Arctic will be here in Chennai and we'll be talking about it in 15 minutes, right? So the camera did the same thing. So it took oil painting and then it gave it wings. So it took the ability for people to make copies, make multiples, make compositions. So the artist in the daytime would have been wandering around Bombay, taking photographs of that lady, that priest, that boy, the child, the courtyards. If you see all the details of the paintings on the wall, obviously of pigeons. So, and then he would sit, develop these images and then compose these paintings, and compose these paintings in such a way that he knew the audience back in England as well as audiences over here in Bombay, because now they clearly were finding a market in Bombay itself, would appreciate works like this. So you had a whole bunch of artists coming into Bombay in the 1890s, very early 1900s, and started to introduce this new type of hyper-realistic painting based off of photographs with a technique that was extremely academic. Horace Van Ruth is a certified Royal Academy award-winning artist. Then you have people like Edwin Lord Weeks. Now, Edwin Lord Weeks was an American, born in Paris, moved to America, and then did that whole circuit and ended up in Bombay again, where you can see. Now, it's an interesting technique. So when you take black and white photographs or photo negatives and you enlarge them onto a canvas, you first do a black and white maquette, because you're converting a black and white into a painting, figuring out it's like a sketch, and then this painting would then be converted to a color version of it, which would then be available for sale and so on. There was a lot of technique. There was a lot of skill involved. It was artists like this, or one of the artists in this whole school of painting, who ended up meeting Ravi Verma, or Ravi Verma met that artist. Ravi Verma was aware of what was happening, and therefore it gave birth to what he did. But this building, and I didn't show you anything last time because I said walk around, but this is a Indo-Saracenic architecture example by Robert Chisholm, who was the dean of the college here in Madras. He was a superintendent between 1880s to about 1890s, and this is his masterpiece. It's the Lakshmi Vilas Palace in Baroda. He finally found patronage there, and this is a phenomenal space. Today it's a museum. The current king and queen of Baroda live there. They're in there. So when you actually go on little walking tours, they open it out. You'll also find bicycles and kids running around. It's nice. It's a house. People live there, and it's functional. So, but it was a coming together in 1890s when they finished this. So you have Robert Chisholm from Madras, who was the architect. I mentioned Horace Van Ruth, who he met. So Horace Van Ruth does a lot of portraits inside the palace. Horace Van Ruth also helps him develop the ideas for stained glass. And as I said last time, stained glasses were being made here in Madras and marketed everywhere. So some of the best stained glass windows, I think the largest stained glass windows in India are in this palace, and they are giant Lakshmis and Saraswatis. So which is why it's not very odd that Ravi Verma also started painting Lakshmi and Saraswati when he started to engage with the palace. Ravi Verma in 1890, around that time, was given a studio in the palace. He lived in Baroda for 10 years. So imagine what's happening. The best architect from Madras, an artist who is Indian in nature, trying to paint like the Europeans, creating the context for an Indian clientele. So he's painting academically Indian subjects. And then you have artists who are coming and going from Europe. This must have been quite a fascinating space between the 1880s when they started building, 1890s when they finished it, and then, you know, a couple of decades after that. So it's amazing how, you know, you don't think Madras influence existed anywhere else, but this is a Madras product in its essence and in its, both in its architecture, its construction. All these little things would have been made here in the college. You know, that's why it was a school of industry. Lots of things, from the furniture to the sculpted exterior to the little, you know, details that you see below the balconies and the gargoyles on top, and all of it would have come from Madras. So I'm just going to try and show you. I don't know if I put it in. Yeah. This is what the Darbar, the interior of their main Darbar hall looks like. And those are all the stained glasses. They look tiny here, but those stained glasses of Lakshmi, Saraswati, Rama, it's the whole Ram Darbar scene there. Those are about 25 feet tall. So you're talking about 4 meters, 4.5 meters tall. and each doorway there is about 16, 17 feet. So, and then you see paintings hung, there's one there. You walk around, you see all the woodwork on top. So they used everybody, right? The chandeliers are Osler, they came in from Europe, you know. So I think about this guy who's funding and fueling a lot of incredible cutting edge artwork that's happening there. But according to Indian art history, and this is something that hopefully when we go through the lens of writing our own histories rather than a colonial history, or a Western slanted history, Ravi Verma is considered to be the first modern Indian master, right? By that definition, meaning he was in the time of the Industrial Revolution, he was an artist who was using a Western academic style, but he inserted his Indianness into his artwork. He created the gods and goddesses. He gave not a visual identity, but he gave character. He kind of took what, you know, like you see nowadays all the cartoons animating Hanuman and Rama as, or you see like Hanuman as this muscle body built action hero, right? So he was doing that essentially to Indian mythology. And providing stories, and he started taking very knowledgeable points. Like a lot of paintings that Ravi Verma did were not random scenes. They actually were very crucial plots, right? They were they're about, you know, famous ones that he did is the one with Draupadi, which actually sold, a similar version of it sold in auction for 22 crores last week. But he painted that scene where Draupadi is disrobed. It's a very quintessential point of the entire Mahabharata, right? It's a very highly important storyline. Or he paints not just the birth of Krishna, but he shows the, you know, instead of Krishna being killed, you know, I'm not getting into the whole story, but Krishna was saved from being killed because the king wanted to kill every newborn child. Same story, all religions. So I think Lakshmi Devi, one goddess, came and took the form, so she was killed. And then it's that point where she departs and curses the king is what Ravi Verma paints. So he was very clever to pull out certain stories and scenes, inserting his identity, his Indianness, and that's why he's considered to be the first modern artist. His educational background, his ideas and where they came from, as I said, you know, is now being debated and is now being contextualized, that he wasn't this random God's gift to Indian art, that he did evolve from a particular technique and a particular direction that art had was being patronized in this country. So that's of course what he was famous for. And here this is, I mean, modern in the sense that nobody ever visualized a god and goddesses more human, right? They're more approachable. They just really do look like two aunties, two mommies picked up, and this mama, you know, you can arrange this in Mylapore in 5 minutes, right? So it's not. He didn't take you away from, you know, he brought you closer, he humanized them. Of course, he inserted his visual identity of the southern slant, right? The women are always looking more southern. They are not these European looking white goddesses that artists were painting at that time. So, of course, they are fair, you know, but the hair and the eyes and the, you know, all of that. So, Ravi Verma then gave rise through his genius, and since this is not a talk about Ravi Verma, I'm going to skip through, but what Ravi Verma did was also democratize the access to art with all his lithographs and prints and books and photographs and all these things. He was mass producing, he had his own press. So this artist is M.V. Durendar. Now Durendar is considered to be the first great Indian teacher and principal of the school in Bombay. He became the principal in the 1920s, but he initially worked as one of the assistants in Ravi Verma's studio, not an assistant to Ravi Verma, but he worked as an assistant who was creating paintings and posters and prints for the Ravi Verma press to be able to publish. Because Ravi Verma press went from being Ravi Verma's own personal lithography studio to a publishing house that published whatever people wanted. They were printing ads, they were printing calendars, they were printing other artists' work. So Durendar in that style did this, but you can see that his growth from painting what would have been academic to now looking like, say, a segue into illustrations, right? This is something that you would find in a magazine. You would find this in our vernacular magazines. You would, and then giving rise to Indian subjects. Like, even if you look at this, you can tell that they're all people who are well off. There's quite a celebration going on. It is celebrating a lot of the Indianness. There is absolutely no Western gaze in this particular image. And he is making it popular. He is bringing in aesthetics that we would consider to be a nice painting. This is something that anybody of anywhere would say, wow, this is a good painting, right? There's no interpretation, it's beautiful. So anyway, this is just a detail of a larger painting. But these are the first few steps into what we contextualize as modern art in India, right? And this is happening, both Ravi Verma and Durendar are based out of Bombay. Then in the parallel time period, the late 1895, early 1910s, you have something interesting happening in Bengal. When I say Bengal, I'm using that term particularly because it covers what we know of as Calcutta, it covers what we know of as Bangladesh. A lot of artists did come from then. We were one larger country at that point. And of course, regions that are loosely around the Bengal presidency, right? So what happens there is that there is a very powerful gentleman by the name of Rabindranath Tagore, right? He is not only what we see him as a freedom fighter, but he also is a very rich kid, very rich kid, right? Rabindranath Tagore is Thakurs were landlords funded the British to fight the Mughals, so they were very large beneficiaries of the system. And that's why he was as educated, that's why he was able to then turn around and fight for freedom, right? You have to come from a place of position. So his brother, nephew, was Rabindranath Tagore, who painted this you can't see it, it's poorly lit, but this is just a typical wash. It's a watercolor gouache on paper of clouds and the sun or the moon behind it. But what Rabindranath Tagore enabled was the idea of looking east. We are all looking west. We're looking at European academic styles of art, European mediums, European subjects, European ideas in describing what type of art we are all doing. So Rabindranath Tagore, his nephew, Rabindranath Tagore, also fueled by a radical principal, E.B. Havell, who was the vice principal here in the 1880s, and then he moved on to Calcutta to become the principal there. E.B. Havell was a very vocal guy. He was a guy who said all European art is rubbish. India has enough tradition. India has so much culture. We need to pull that up. And he found a favor with Rabindranath Tagore, who supported him. He supported the Tagore. So it was kind of a good symbiotic relationship. It provided a voice for this so-called revolution in art, which is why the first phase of India's modern art, or the engagement with modernist ideas, happened in Bengal, and that's why they always call themselves the Neo Bengal School, where they reinvented certain ideas and the New Bengal School formed. So you have many artists, but this is Hemen Majumdar. Again, you can see the takeoff from Ravi Verma, from the Orientalists, but his whole idea was he was looking at a narrative which was looking at common subjects, right? They weren't only kings and queens and goddesses and princes. He usually painted his wife half the time. His preoccupation was about intimacy, about what they wear. He is the father of the wet sari. So so every movie that you see, all those Raj Kapoor films and any actress in the 50s, 60s running around in wet saris, it's his visual, right? So he creates that, and that's why he was as important. He also was a counter voice to the Tagores, not against, but he countered their idea. He said, I can still be European academic, but I will create a subject and I will create a certain understanding and a certain language based on what I think is my aesthetics, right? So, and then of course you have the more popular proponent, the most successful one of the lot, who is Jamni Roy. Jamni Roy surprisingly was the faction against Tagore's. The Tagore's published and helped support books like the Modern Review, which is a very, very intellectual journal at the time. Hemendranath Majumdar, Jamini Roy, and a few others, including a couple of nephews of Tagore's, published an opposing magazine that spoke about a different type of aesthetics. But the fact that this was happening in Bengal was modern, right? It was something that you would not have, dialogue was not considered to be something that you did in the past. But here dialogue was happening, visuals were being broken, and this is as, not Indian, but this is as unique as you can get, right, to the location, to the person, and coming from a person who knew everything. I mean, if you see early Jamini Roy works, he could paint as well as any Rembrandt could, but he decided to do this. Please remember this, because this is the crux for discussing a lot of artists that represent Madras. Now, time period, this all happened in the 1920s to 1930s, right? That was the peak, and then they also started to kind of fade out, and the center started to shift, and it made its way all the way back to Bombay. Now, think of the art and what I'm trying to do, and that's the history that I'm trying to rewrite, is not to break up India's art into Madras School, Bombay School, Calcutta School, Delhi School, right? I'm trying to find, and there is very clearly a path and a narrative which allows the center to shift from place to place, right? Because ideas are allowed to move. Like the Paris school was great for starting modern art, but then it moved to New York, and then from New York in the, in the 60s and 70s, and then by the 90s it moved back to London. Whoever thought, and then it now from London it's moved into metaverse. That's the movement of art today, right? It's gone from, popular towns to now literally in our pockets. So this is a painting. I mean, this is just an example, but this is Haldankar. He was one of the many artists at that time who started to paint like this. This is what happened when you took the Bengal school idea of painting with watercolors and painting your area, your surroundings, your nature, your passions, and then the academic style of the Ravi Vermas and the Europeans who were painting. And finally, in the 1920s and 30s in Bombay and most of India, they decided that this is what is modern art, right? So using watercolors, using local, more natural mediums, not using oil paints, because if you're now at this point in time, if you're using oil paints, you had to submit a portrait or a phenomenal masterpiece that was, like a scene and painted really well, and so these guys were breaking away from all of that. This in the 1930s is a very early N.S. Bendre. Now, something important happens here, and this is a massive shift and it affects all of India. Like Instagram has affected photography, this particular style affected art. Every single artist in this entire country today will go through this when they are learning how to paint. This is India's idea of painting today, whether it's Paresh Methi who's painting today or whether this was Bendre who painted in the 1930s. This is the idea of landscape. This is the taking a watercolor and creating a beautiful picture, right? So this is what most of us think of as art, and the reason for that was in the 1930s and 40s, printing became very, very accessible in India. Offset printing was brought in the 40s in Bombay. Times of India was printing for everybody and anything. You had so many publications coming in. You also had all the British imposed restrictions on publications removed. So there were many local newspapers that was coming about. You didn't have to get the approval of your local British government to print something. There was a printing boom, right? So when that happened, you had to reproduce something in color. And at that point in time, the only way to reproduce color was by painting with watercolors on what were, they call them blocks, but essentially it's your CMYK, it's color separation, and the artist would paint them, and then they would choose one color and print it. That was the technique, and only if you had this skill, you would find employment painting those paintings. And because there was a commercial printing boom, it enabled all these artists to both practice this style as something that's a new visual. It was something that was being done in America, it was being done in Paris, it was being done in most of the world where printing affected all of this. So this is the kind of visual that you start to see evolving. Sorry, bad picture, but again, this is height of modern art. This is again a Bendre. and in the late 30s, he was supposed to be, he was the topmost artist who was creating waves with his modern art. Think about how he has deconstructed this. It's a market scene. I'm sure if you squint, you can see it better. It's a market scene with lots of people, but the people have just been made into patches of color, right? So you can just see cloth and heads and vegetable, all. It's kind of pointillist. It does lead into what he finally does for the most of his career. But you can see how people in the 40s would have seen this and said, oh, modern art. He's not painting people properly. His skill is not shown. He's not making it look beautiful the way you knew it. So this is what was modern art in the 1940s in and around Bombay, Nagpur, Indore, and such. Meanwhile, in Delhi, you had the Mayo School, you had a school of art in Delhi. You had people like, this is Chuktai. Now, Chuktai is an interesting character, and many people like him. They had the influence of the Bengal School, because you had teachers in the Bengal School go to Delhi as well, and they had the influence of the Delhi culture. So you had your miniature paintings, you had the architecture there. So this is a mix between a miniature, a Mughal miniature, and a Bengal School painting. And this was considered modern again in the 1930s and 40s. Chuktai eventually moved to Pakistan, and he is considered the father of modern art in Pakistan. And that's why I've brought him in here to show you how, again, centers of art shift. Independence happens, Pakistan separates, and that history went off that side, and we don't consider it as part of ours. But this is what was happening in the north and western sides of India. And then in the same period, the 1930s and 40s, is this gentleman, D.P. Roy Chaudhary, who comes to Madras as the principal and creates this whole shift of what was happening in Madras. So, hope you've all been with me, Bombay to Calcutta, and now we've arrived back here. And you can see that Roy Chaudhary is painting very academically, very Bengal school-like, very dark and depressing. And now that I've been studying him a little bit more, I think he seriously had a depression problem, because his paintings are all titled Despair, Ghosts. If you see the titles of his work, they're quite sad. It's like, Scavenger, Winter is coming, So, but anyway, he would paint these scenes in another. This is somewhere around, I believe, Madras only, where these fishermen, he would paint, again, remnants of or beginnings of Calcutta school, where they always focused on poverty, they focused on the famines, they focused on the very depressing side of life. But anyway, so Roy Chaudhary comes in, you can see his talent. He is extremely talented academically. He's not predominantly a painter or a draftsman, he's a sculptor. He ends up becoming fairly, I think, the father of modern sculpture in most of India. But he starts to do this. So now you see the visual, right? Madras is not painting the Bendre style of work. They're not yet starting to paint like what was very popular in Bombay. This is again Roy Chaudhary, early work, and you can see that it still has the very dark side of the landscape, but you can see that it's a blend between something like what Bendre was doing and something what was happening in the Bengal school. Now, in the 40s, this is a later example, but Roy Chaudhary started teaching students here, and his students started to paint like this. Now you can start to see the Madras school in the 40s adopting again this watercolor technique, which was very popular, which became part of the academic curriculum, because it also got you employed. Right? This is what people expect. I went to college, my son went to college, my daughter went to college, they know how to paint, here's a good painting, right? As opposed to coming back with an empty canvas and saying that's my painting. So, Roy Chaudhary teaches people, Panicker starts to paint like this, everybody in the college is painting like this, and hence I said there are not too many more slides in the talk. There are 4 or 5 pictures behind the screen you guys can look at, or if you've seen this earlier, they are works by other students of D.P. Roy Chaudhary, like you have Aruldas, Tyagaraj, Arulraj, and that whole gang. Then you have other students, Surendranath, everybody here, people like Krishna Rao, and everybody who's displayed here does paint like this in the 50s and 60s, and this is their idea of modern art. Panicker very much thought this was modern art. He writes about this, saying that, you know, they were painting modern art. And this is 1948, by the way. So 1944, he's already started the Progressive Painters Association here in Madras. So very clearly Panicker thought that this was progressive artwork, this was modern artwork, right? But meanwhile, what happens is, back in Bombay in the 1940s, at the heart of independence, you have a group of these very young guys, 6, 7 of them. This is Raza painting this in 1944. Again, you can see that they're all similar. Now the works are becoming, you can't tell one from the other, right? Same watercolor, same landscape, same shadow and light, same, you know, those patchy people. You know, the idea of modern art is being, you know, repeated over and over again. And then this is Ara, who was friends with Raza, who became part of the Progressive Artists group in 1947. Similar patches of color, very quick, not even filling the whole paper. That was modern, right? Because you're rebelling against the notion of completing the entire canvas. This was all their ringleaders. So this was Walter Langhamer, who was an Austrian who came to India to escape persecution in Europe. He moved to Bombay. He also is painting like this. Of course, he's, you know, academically trained, so he does oils on canvas, but he's still painting in that similar style where everything is just applied. It's not fully developed. It's you know, but they're capturing the light and the shade and the shadow, because he also was the head designer for Times of India. So whatever he was doing was also being published in the magazines. They were in the covers. They had to be attractive, right? So think about magazine covers today. What do you put on those covers? You put up something that's bright and attractive, and that's going to get you some eyeballs. So these were getting eyeballs, and these were considered to be the height of modern art in Bombay and most of India. Calcutta School by the 1940s had collapsed. Like, it was no longer cool. They were still doing the same things. The dialogue had left, and everything had shifted to Bombay. And any guesses for who this might be? Because this is a newly discovered painting. Most people do not know this, but this is Hussein's earliest known work. So this was done in 1947, 48, like just after he so-called gave up being a designer of furniture. He also paints like this. So clearly everybody had to paint like this if they had to be known, become popular, find work, exhibited, be called a modern artist, right? So this is, then everything changed. Independence happened. All the guys from Bombay who were the cutting edge modern artists decided they'll all go to Europe. So in 1949, Sousa goes to London. Raza in 50 goes to Paris. Padamsee goes to Paris. Ramkumar goes to Paris. Everybody who was in Bombay decides that they will go to Paris, because independence has happened. We are no longer bound by our country. We can travel freely. There was no passports then. They could just go. Like, you didn't need visas and passports. And they ended up staying there because you didn't have visas and passports till they caught you, and then they said we'll be citizens and so on and so forth. But this is the early work, 1955 by Padamsee. So now you see what they did. In 1955, these young boys really spun things around. They really set the bar very high. They took those watercolors that you knew and broke it down into what were, and this is why the European art historians aren't able to grab the ideas of Indian art independent to global art. They look like poor Picassos, but the point is they understood Cubism. They were exploring the ideas of Cubism. They were exploring the idea of modern art from the ground perspective in Paris. So Padamsee did this. Sousa did this in 1959. This is Hussein doing this in 1952. So you see how he went from 47 in 4 years. In 52, he's already doing this, and all our Chennai guys are still painting watercolors. So now you understand the shift that had happened. So suddenly you have Panicker and the Progressive Painters Association in Madras, who have been thrown a googly, and these guys are doing this, and we're still doing watercolors, landscapes. There is no engaging subject, so to say. They're not engaging with India, they're not engaging with independence, they're not engaging with a single point of view, they're not engaging with their own perspective. So that's when something started to happen. Panicker becomes more established. Roy Chaudhary also, Roy Chaudhary was a long-term principal. He was there from 29 up till 56 or something like that. That's a long time, right? But he was putting out students like nobody else has, right? He was able to produce, I would say, 500-600 artists who were all of great caliber, who were all very good. His direct students of Roy Chaudhary, you can say there are about 100 artists who are known and who are important to the Madras Art School. Then you have Panicker, who himself is a Roy Chaudhary product, right? Because he's inspired by his teacher, he learns from him, he's being empowered and emboldened to go and have these dialogues, right? So he comes out on his own in the late 50s and decides, okay, now I'm going to be the principal, it's my 20 years now, and he starts to execute his vision. And that's when he says, okay guys, all you guys, meaning his students, and you know, it wasn't much of a student-teacher relationship as it was an artist and artist relationship. And he said, let's go out there, let's see what's happening in the world. Panicker starts to travel, he goes to Europe, he looks at modern art, he comes back here, he brings books in. He then has students like Munuswamy and Santhanaraj and, you know, this whole gang. So he puts out another 50 to 60 students who are all firing, you know, like they're all working and painting with this idea of modern art. And, you know, so this is 1961. So as soon as Panicker takes over as principal, he unlocks this idea of modern art. He goes in there and says, all of you please stop painting these watercolors. All of you please stop looking at these old ideas. Here are books. Look at this guy. There's Paul Klee, there's Picasso, there's Matisse, there's Cézanne. They're saying all these things in Europe. You go to museums there are no more watercolors on the walls. They're all these modern pieces of art. Remember, by 1961, you have artists who at the Met and the MoMA are already displaying blue canvas, red canvas, toned canvas. Think about the context, right? Munuswamy is doing this, and in our Madras context, we think of him as one of the most important artists in the Madras movement. He's the first guy who comes and breaks the visual. He breaks the plane. He breaks the line. There is nothing that he has not broken in this work. He's painting with oils. He's painting on canvas. He's moved from the medium, you know, and lived the life of an artist, died the life of an artist. And as you can see, changed the visual. He did become a teacher himself. He was a principal for a while. He inspired a whole other batch of students to paint. This was his counterpart and contemporary, Santhanaraj, who also again started to look at the idea of what was modern art, started to move from watercolors and paper into canvas. They became very brave. They were able to handle this new medium, which until that point of time was told them is only reserved for people who paint portraits, people who know how to use the medium carefully, right? And also, I mean, of course, there was availability of material was an issue, but yeah. So he started to paint like this. This is a 80s work, but he was doing this right out of college and stuck to this style of work. Surprisingly, Panicker was busy encouraging artists to paint and be modern, but he got onto the ride a little bit later. So it's an interesting story, and it's something that you know, those of you familiar with the movement here can think about it. So Panicker, after 57, I'll give you a little bit of a history. This story I will tell you, and it's a story that is interesting. It can be discussed and debated a lot more. So Panicker becomes principal in 1957, and he takes over. He genuinely thinks that he's going to be a principal for a while, because the system was such: you be a principal and you retire and the next principal comes in. 1964, 62, whenever, and you can let me know, a new government comes into power in this state. The current government, the DMK, comes into power, and the DMK came into power on a few promises, which included the idea of being Dravidian. They included the idea of providing opportunity for the Dravidian population, because a political party needs something to oppose. So they created the Dravidian, non-Dravidian, the Brahmin, non-Brahmin argument. And I mean, yesterday Stalin said, my name is Stalin, so I'm a communist. But you know, it was in the paper today, he just happily declared that the DMK is also communist. But you know, so they had to be Brahmin, non-Brahmin to win the seats, to win the masses. And then they also brought that argument into the college. It was true. I mean, it's not fiction. It happened. There was strikes. It created the division line then, and that is the battle that Panicker was thrown into. He had to around 65, 66 decide, because the government said, hey, now there is no more opportunity for long-term principals. We will appoint guys every 4 years. We will have reservation. We will bring in people. They changed the system. They said only if you are the principal at Kumbakonam, which is the sister college that still exists today, only then you can be the principal in the college in Madras. So they started to manipulate the system however they could, and that was the final blow that has driven the college into a lot of issues. The college grapples with communal issues, with unnecessary conflict, to the point where we'll get to that a little later. But Panicker at that point was getting frustrated. He was getting fed up. He was not able to sit and administer a college which was now being divided not on the lines of art, but on the lines of community and caste and religion and politics and many things in there. So he decides, okay, fine. And then of course the great sculptor Dhanapal, whose works are here, also towed the other line. He decided that he would also like to be principal. He thought he was going to succeed Panicker, but they made Krishna Rao the principal, because Krishna Rao was principal at Kumbakonam and therefore had finished his quota, became principal, angered Dhanapal a lot more, and then of course all that happened. So they hadn't divided yet. Dhanapal and Panicker are still very good friends. So in 1967, when he had to step down as principal, he decides, okay guys, I'm going to start Cholamandal. This is a great idea that I have, and I'm going to start Cholamandal. And Cholamandal, because Chola as in the Cholas, Mandalam, the land, and you know, he's very much for the area. So he creates Cholamandal, but you need to be funded. So he comes up with this phenomenal idea. In 64, 65, he had started the textile department in the college, and obviously he found somebody from somewhere to come and teach batik. So the 4 pictures there that are hanging there are batiks that were introduced into the college curriculum by Panicker. This rides on the entire idea that it is still the College of Arts and Craft. So he decided, wait a minute, I can go back to the idea of craft, create an income source that is not dependent on interpreting modern art or opinions, but I can sell craft at much lower prices, sustain the artists, and then I can fund my movement. So he actually manages, and of course Panicker is a phenomenal networker. He, like his mentor Roy Chaudhary, knows people, knows how to get access, puts things together, and he has one exhibition come sale of batiks where he gets all his students, all his 40, 50 artists at that point who were championing his cause, and got them to rally with him, and they all created these batiks. And I think the first exhibition was in 65, 66, where they have a great sale. They sell for 20,000 rupees worth of batiks, right, at 20 rupees and 30 rupees. That's a lot of batiks. Just to imagine, there would have been a bunch of people wearing batik veshtis and shirts and whatever. I mean, they're just selling them as textiles, right? So that's how he finds the seed money to buy the 9.5 or so acres in Cholamandal. At that point, there was no bus service beyond the Adyar. Like, if you speak to even guys like Douglas and he would say, they would come to Adyar and then he would just walk from Adyar all the way to Cholamandal, right, which is like 6 hours. He would just walk, he and Ramanujam, and be chased by dogs, and it was forests and casuarina groves and beach and sand, no real road. So that's where they went, and with him he brought all these people, and that's when Panicker actually had the time after he retired to sit and think about his practice. So that's when he decides to experiment from the inputs, from the discussion, from the community that he created. So you had people like Velu Vishwanathan, who was exploring words, written words in the painting. You had Ramanujam, who was exploring line. He was just going nuts with the line. Then you had Munuswamy doing what he did, Santan Raj doing what he did. Santan Raj was breaking the plane. Munuswamy was breaking a dimension. He was painting half the stuff with a completely different dimension. And he took all of this. You had Sultan Ali, who was from Delhi, but equal in age as Panicker. Clearly they were discussing. And it's only in the late 60s that Panicker starts to paint his idea of what is modern art. So it's very interesting to see that, he built this community, starts to paint, takes all their input, has discussions. There's a lot of intellectual, artistic, communal discussion going on, and that's when he creates these. And he says it's just a break from the visual. It's no longer the watercolors, it's no longer landscapes, but it's ideas, it's thought, he questions anything can be art, right? And this is a point in time where the whole world is doing all kinds of things. So this is how modern art then kind of broke through. You have people, see this particular work is actually older than the Panicker. Right, so it's, and then if you start to look at Panicker and interpret him through his group of artists, you'll realize that he actually did take inputs. It's good. That's the debate. That's why there is a continuity. That's why I can say Roy Chaudhary to Panicker to Munuswamy to Santhanaraj to all these gentlemen here. So sticking to the 60s, that work is from the 60s, right? So look at what Mukaya is doing, look at how he is looking at the primitive, look at ideas of Jamni Roy, ideas of artists in Bengal, right, who are breaking down the narrative, going back to their tradition, going back to the primitive. You have Perumal, who was again moving away from what was academic and creating ideas that came from his background, his idea of what was the rural. So this is like rural modernism, right, if you want to interpret it that way. The scenes and the stories are everyday life here, but how he has given form and function and aesthetics. And think about it, it's a modern city, that's a view of a regular city, but then the people there, are functioning like stick figures, right? So he has the ability to break it down. So did Mukaya. And then, of course, people like Vardarajan, who were in the 60s being sent to the Paris and Venice Biennales, right? Vardarajan was exhibiting along with Gaitonde in 61. So they were doing great things. They were using mediums. They had access to more material. If you take all the paintings from the 1960s by date, across all these artists, you'll suddenly see that they all use one particular green, because apparently at that time a paint company came and introduced and gave that particular green to the artists in the college, and there's one particular green, it's hints of that painting, it has that kind of greens, but all of them will have, in 1960 or 61, they will all have that same green, irrespective of who the artist is, if you were studying in the college. So, so they were all discussing, they were talking, they were staying in the college, they would paint for hours on end. Then there was this new community that was being built where they were discussing art, and that is, and think about it, even in this room, we've put together 4 different types of thoughts in modern art, right? You have what is the primitive idea here, you have the craft, I mean, that's still modern art, it's not discounted, it still is very much modern, it's still in the style of all those artists' practices. So, but you have an idea of blending craft along with art, you have over there you have Vardarajan showing you the possibilities of mediums, right? He uses spray paint, he uses photo inks, he uses stencils, he uses cutouts, he does reverse painting. So he's an artist who's using as many mediums as possible, and that is quintessentially, the modernist exploration or the modernist idea. So, and then here you have somebody like Krishna Rao, who's gone from being a landscape painter, breaking it down into some kind of a abstract expressionist style, finding his own evolution from being somebody who could have painted watercolors to breaking it down. So all of this is happening. Krishna Rao and Panicker are the co-publishers of Art Trends, right? So think of how they were all actually together, right? And then things happened. Dhanapal became principal, he did draw the line in the sand, and with that you had a whole bunch of artists who did exit Cholamandal, people like Adimulam, all of them exited, not singling him out, but the many other artists exited. People like Vardarajan decided that he didn't want to be part of this politics, and he went and became a teacher. He says, I don't have the income to be able to sit and express myself too much. A lot of people, went their ways, but finally Cholamandal became this a community of hardcore followers of Panicker, artists who were also outsiders, right? Ramanujam had his own issues, Douglas was from elsewhere, studied in the college, all of them studied in the college, but it allowed for the other community, the other outsiders to get together, come together and have these thoughts. But it was the seed that Panicker planted, this modernist idea that he planted, that has actually allowed the college, its vision, the idea of modern art in Madras to actually move further, because it has definitely moved away from the college. But you know, this is Douglas, again a bad picture, sorry, but you know, you can see the continuity, like it has the next stage to what Panicker had done. It has the words, he writes words in his work. It has the visuals that are no longer Madras alone, but it has the strength of the line, which is what Madras is known for. They're very good draftsmen who carry that throughout their career, and because they can draw so well is how they can break things up, right? Literally, Douglas starts to fragment, he breaks, he cuts, he dismembers, he uses all kinds of medium. He uses paper, he uses canvas, he uses tea and coffee and whatever is there, right? He uses charcoal, he puts, but how did that happen? Because his teacher, while he was in college, was Vardarajan, obviously telling him, do what you want, use what you want, paint what you want, right? So this progresses, of course, and then and this is like, I mean, this is a new work, but Douglas is a product of the 80s and the 90s, and probably I'm being very politically incorrect here, but he is the last surviving legacy of Cholamandal, right? Because he's the only artist there who today is actually still practicing and pushing that discussion further, but how far can he take it as an individual? And then, of course, the college itself starts to, it survives in the 2000s because of students of Panicker and Roy Chaudhary and Munuswamy and Santhanaraj. You have people like Bhaskar and Alfonso Das, Anthony Das, you know, who are all becoming principals. They're the last fading away old guys. I mean, they're all dead now, but you know, they were holding it as much as they could through the 90s, through the early 2000s, inspiring as many students as they could. We work with few of them. You know, we're also desperately trying to see where the narrative is going, where is the Madras school going, and then we realized that if you follow the line, if you follow the idea of being able to execute phenomenal artwork, that is your craftsmanship, the College of Arts and Craft, the craft part of your practice, and take that along with the ability to look within, the modern part of the practice, which is to look within, see what you are bringing onto your work. Every one of these artists bring themselves onto their work, right? They project themselves onto their artwork. So Douglas is somebody who did that, Ramanujam did that, Panicker did that, and so when we follow the line, Krishnaswamy here, who works with this gallery, who is doing very well, also starts to then move away from the physicality of creating artwork into using himself. He becomes the artwork. He is, so here when I talk about modernism is when you insert yourself in it. In the contemporary fashion, he is the subject. Medium moves outside of the canvas. The medium becomes anything. He is a direct line from all those teachers. He is a product of Alfonso Das, and then of course, you know, we come down to artists who are this is not for you, but this is genuinely the you know, the line. This is where that line comes to. This is what contemporary art in Madras is, and this is around the mid-early 2000s. Today, we don't know where it is. This is something that will be interesting. I think you can only do this retrospectively to see where the Madras school is moving, right? Whether the school will still exist in its manner. Who is the next Roy Chaudhary? Who is the next Panicker? I have grappled the last 20 years. I have not met that force, that person, that power of change, right? So that particular line right now seems to be just like there is nothing there at the moment. I know kids are, you walk into the college, I'm always amazed by the quality of the work, right? The student work is powerful. They're all raw, they're fresh, but who is there to lead them forward? And I think that's going to be the next debate for this whole thing. But this has been the journey of modern art in Madras. This is a little glimpse of what is happening into the contemporary scene here, and hopefully we create more dialogue. And as Roy Chaudhary has pointed out, as Panicker, as Munuswamy, as Santanraj, as all the teachers and principals, if we do not create dialogue in this city, it's all going to come to a very screeching halt, right? So part of the reason why I've put myself out here talking to you guys, putting it out into the world, is to say that, I'm willing to have this dialogue. Ashwita is willing to carry forward some of this dialogue. We've seriously programmed this entire year, like 1 year from now is going to be showing only art from the Madras School. We're not going to be doing anything else. Our next show is Srinivasalu, who is again classmates with Panicker, Roy Chaudhary's student, the direct Calcutta impact. We're doing a retrospective for him. We've managed to pull together about 50 works of his. I don't think it's been shown together much. Then the show after that is going to be a career retrospective, the best we can for Alfonso Das. He passed away 2 years ago. So we're going to try and program this. We're going to try and bring back a Panicker show into Chennai. We're speaking to the Travancore Trivandrum Museum, and dialogue seems to be moving somewhere. We want to show it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to try and bring the art back into the city, which I think for some reason, because of the lack of visibility into our own art history, because we're not sure, Chennai has 4 galleries, and all 4 galleries need to show things that can make them pay the rent, right? So there isn't room for this. Hopefully we'll engage that way, engage with more artists. We're always open. The good thing about this lecture series and this exhibition itself, we've been very happy that people have been coming in here. We've had more footfall than I promise you than ever before. It's only because people want to relate to their artwork, their culture. We've opened up the place. Our libraries are open to people who want to come here, just sit and read. We've been having people come here, and we're trying to create as much access as we can to this. And so this is hopefully going to create some dialogue, and we do welcome all your participation and all your engagement. And of course, there's always going to be some wine and cheese whenever we do something, so you can come and have a good time. And we were trying to see how much we can make this place a community. It may not provide everything that an artist needs, but we'll try and provide the support, the shoulder. So thank you so much, and hope these 3 talks made sense at some point. So thank you.